We are relying too much on this frontal lobe that has evolutionarily developed faster than any other system in the world. The rest of our systems have evolved over millions of years. We're forgetting about feeling. We're only thinking about thinking. We're not thinking about how it is that our body is feeling.
Who are you?
I teach people how to circumvent that frontal lobe system so that they can communicate with their bodies. I'm an associate professor at Saybrook University. I'm NIH funded. I'm involved in lots of different dissertations.
How do you determine that we are doing that too much?
We don't have tools to quantify our feelings.
Are you open to walking us through your own journey with that?
I have Graves' disease, which is an autoimmune dysfunction and completely destroys your thyroid. I went through about a year and a half of managing that. And that's when somebody said to me, you really should try biofeedback. In 1998, I went back to school as a freshman so that I could learn how to do this. We're going to teach you how to put your brain into the state that it needs to be into for what it is that you're doing at the moment.
How does biofeedback, neurofeedback, almost ironically using more technology, help us reconnect with our own bodies?
That's such a great question.
Welcome to today's episode of Getting to Know You. I'm your host, Cameron Edward Benton, and on today's episode, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Cynthia Kerson. Dr. Cynthia Kerson is an applied psychophysiologist specializing in neurofeedback, biofeedback, and QEEG. She's a professor at Saybrook University, teaching EEG, biofeedback, QEEG, and neuropsychophysiology. She's the founder and director of education at Applied Psychophysiology Education, or APED. She's a board-certified diplomate in QEEG, one of the highest certifications in quantitative EEG analysis. She's the vice president of the Behavioral Medicine Research and Teaching Foundation, the BMRTF. She's the past president of the Biofeedback Society of California Research and Literature Contributions. She's a co-investigator of a 5-year NIH-funded research project on neurofeedback for ADHD. She's the editor of Alpha Theta Neurofeedback in the 21st Century, a handbook on neurofeedback therapy. She's the author of multiple peer-reviewed studies on neurofeedback, EEG, connectivity, and ADHD treatment. And last but not least, she is the chair of the Home Winemakers Classic in Napa Valley, California. If you think that was a mouthful, she is so much more than that. In this episode, we cover why, after all those accolades, she still identifies as a grandmother, a mother, and a sister above all, the difference between what you think you feel and what you actually feel, and why that's important, and Cynthia's thoughts on the emerging influence of AI on neurofeedback. One thing I really appreciated about Cynthia was how authentic she was during the entire episode. She laughed, she giggled, she teared up, and this episode is incredibly vulnerable and sacred. She was just a brilliant, beautiful human being on display who was very much demonstrating that she practices what she teaches so many others to learn, to tune into your own body, to listen, and to let that guide you on your journey through this life. So without further ado, here is getting to know Dr. Cynthia Kerson. Who are you?
I did ask for that to be a surprise question. And actually, I'm glad that I waited till now to know that question. Who am I? I am a grandmother, a mother, a wife, a sister, I'm not a brother. I have a brother. I am someone who's been in my field for almost 30 years that has worked with some of the biggest shoulders, the shoulders I've stood on kind of thing, and feel really blessed to have gotten into the field when I did, because I feel like I have learned so much from all of the people that have been in the field a little bit longer than I have, and feel like I am that person who can carry forth their dreams now that they're gone. I guess that's who I am.
Love it. The first thing that really struck me was if you look up your name on the internet, you are associated with about 1,001 leadership positions, I think, in the neurofeedback, biofeedback space, and more than that, wine and as well, which I will want to dig into a little bit later in the episode. And yet the first thing you started off with when I asked you that question was a grandmother, a mother, a sister. Why did you start there?
Well, because that's who I am, that's who I am. That's my person. For one thing, the most precious thing I have in this world is the fact that I'm a grandmother and that I have 2 absolutely amazing grandchildren. I feel really blessed that I have a really wonderful blended family. My husband and I are both second marriage, and we each brought a gorgeous daughter into our picture. We never had a child of our, that we share.
Mhm.
And I feel really blessed that our family functions beautifully. And I love being in this family. So that comes first and foremost in my world as who I think I am. The second most important thing to me of who I am, of course, is, who I am in the field of applied psychophysiology.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for the audience's sake, what is applied psychophysiology? That is a complicated sounding thing.
I know, right? It is the application of teaching people to be to utilize their psychology and their physiology. So from a clinical perspective, it's the mind-body thing. It's connecting people with their psychology and their physiology and connecting those two pieces within the whole person to make, to support the growth and the health of the whole person.
Got it. So for you, it's essentially the intersection between, like in a sense, like psychology and physiology. It's the mind-body connection. It's like, what strikes me is honestly one of the questions I had in like 7th grade biology class, which was like, we're learning all about cells and how our body's made up of these other organisms that do things seemingly independent of whether I want them to or not, whatever that means. And yet somehow I am all of these things and just this one thing that I call Cameron at the same time. And it makes me almost think that like you're kind of looking at that intersection in a lot of ways of like, okay, what is it that makes us who we are, and how does our psychology affect the way we feel or the way we behave, and how does our behaviors or our actions change the way that we think or relate to the world? Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, it's a really accurate assessment. And when I teach, mentor, whatever I'm doing, I'm always reminding people that they're not a technician that is pushing buttons that rewards people, or, that when they do whatever it is we want it to do, the brain, the heart, whatever, breathing, whatever, that at every moment we have to remind people that there is this parallel universe of the psychology that we need to, okay, this is going on in your physiology. What's going on in your psychology at this moment? Let's pause this. Let's talk about this. Or, when you say to someone, wow, you had a really nice, 5-minute session there with your heart rate variability or whatever. And how do you feel? Oh, I feel so relaxed. And I'm like, that's your frontal lobes. How do you feel? What's going on in your body? Tell me where there's things that are good and bad. Do you feel this in your chest? Do you feel that in your gut, in your neck, and whatever? So I'm always teaching people how to feel, without putting words on it, with just, well, you do have to put words on it, but without having your frontal lobes be interfering. So teaching people how to get out of their frontal lobes and communicate with their bodies, because I feel relaxed, or I feel tired, or I feel whatever. Those are words that cognize your feelings. And so I teach people how to circumvent that frontal lobe system so that they can communicate with their bodies.
Why is that important? I think the reason I'm asking that is the first thing that comes up for me with that kind of a conversation is often what we hear is what makes us special as human beings is our frontal lobe, right? It's this ability to cognate, is our ability to think clearly and make decisions, have executive control, not just be moved by our feelings. So why is that particularly important to you?
Well, because we are relying too much on this frontal lobe that has evolutionarily developed faster than any other system in the world, in history. The frontal lobes have developed in a couple of thousand years.
Wow.
The rest of our systems have evolved over millions, really. of years when you go back, depending upon what evolutionary model you believe in, that go back, millions of years. So for this to be developed so fast, what's happening is it's overdeveloping the more primal areas in our brain and sort of kind of what's the word I want to use? Kind of squashing them out, So we're forgetting about feeling. We're only thinking about thinking. We're not thinking about how it is that our body is feeling. When you think about every other species, the most important thing is how their body feels. What do they hear? Is there a predator? Are they hungry? Those kinds of things. Those are really important things for survival, but also for emotional survival. And we put too much emphasis on thinking rather than feeling. So,
how do you determine that we are doing that too much? Like, well, you said that we're thinking more than we're feeling. We're doing that too much. Like, what is the assessment for too much versus not enough? Like, what is the sort of evidence or that kind of thing that you're backing that from?
Well, there isn't. There is not any. We can't quantify that. That's one of the biggest problems that we have in psychology is that we don't have tools to quantify our feelings. We can use the Beck inventories, we can use the, anxiety, this and that and the other, and people can mark down what they think, but we don't have a way to quantify the energy that we take in, put out, whatever. So, it's because we don't have the tools to quantify it that we don't know how to speak about it in a way that is tangible, I should say. I can't answer you, I can't sterminize that is
Sure.
how we used to call it with Barry, by showing you data. But I can say that I think we all, I hate these things. We all can speak to, we all can speak to what's going on in our world right now and how, just how anxious everybody is and how hard the world is to everybody. And so that's kind of a global perspective, but I think we are forgetting that we need to look at it from a more individual perspective and teach ourselves resilience. Our frontal lobes are not going to teach us resilience. We have to learn that through our bodies.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, what really struck to me when you initially brought this up was the distinction between, oh, I'm feeling tired, and you're like, oh no, that's not a feeling. And that almost surprised me when you said that. I was like, oh, you're actually right though, right? You're talking about the actual physical sensations in my body versus the label that I have created about those associations, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So if you say, I have a stomach ache, what does a stomach ache feel like to you? It might be something completely different to me. It might be, for me, it might be my muscles feel really tight and I can't breathe properly. For you, it might be, I just feel all this gas or, butterflies or, whatever, it's a different experience. So, it needs to be, from my perspective, I'm not a clinician anymore, but when I was, this is what I would do. Now I teach people who are wanting to be clinicians in this area to look for those kinds of things, to teach people to recognize what their body is experiencing, even if there aren't words for it. It's like, well, I love that Joni Mitchell said, laughter and crying, it's all the same release. It's like, if I laugh, I feel it in my gut. If I cry, I have the same exact feeling in my gut. It's exactly the same feeling, but my frontal lobe is telling me, right now you're happy or right now you're sad, right? So it's understanding that physiological experience that is where biofeedback and neurofeedback become, really, really valuable to someone who wants to, get away from the thinking and the frontal lobe and all that kind of stuff and understand themselves better from that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. How does, and maybe we give a primer on what these are for those who aren't as inclined into the technology and stuff, but like how does biofeedback, neurofeedback, I want to say almost ironically, using more technology help us reconnect with our own bodies and those feeling places?
That's such a great question. And when I got into the field in the 90s, we had like maybe four systems. I knew them all inside out. I had them all, it was great. And now there's all of these apps and on your phone and, on our wrists and all this kind of stuff. And yes, the technology is there. But all that they're doing is amplifying what we can't hear. And to rely upon them and wear your watch and your Oura ring or, whatever, to rely upon them to tell you how your body feels is completely negative. You need to utilize those tools. They're wonderful tools. They amplify what's happening in your body, but you need to use them as a stepping stone to, oh, that's what that feels like when my chest does that. It means I am in a good way, in a bad way.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
Can you, so I love all this. Can you just give like a quick primer on like neurofeedback and biofeedback, what that is for somebody who's never heard of or seen anything like that before?
Yeah. So neurofeedback is one of the modalities of biofeedback in general. There's a bunch of modalities. There's your heart rate. There's something known as heart rate variability. There's your breath rate. There's your distal temperature. We measure temperature on your finger because we want to know not what your core temperature is, but how your blood is flowing and how that's affecting distal areas. The neurofeedback is measuring and feeding back the information from your brain. So the terms neurofeedback, biofeedback are terms where we instantaneously feed back to you your biological state, right? So that biological state, it's again amplified. We're using amplifiers, and in the moment, it's teaching you how you feel, right? And it's not teaching you how you feel because it's some kind of an app or something like that. It's teaching you really, it's feeding back really what's going on in your body. So here's an example. When I first learned about biofeedback, I sought out a clinician who did it in my area because I wanted to do it. And so he hooked me up to all these crazy things. I had no idea what the heck was going on. This was back in 1997. I had no idea what was going on. And one of the things that he did was he hooked up my muscles on my forearms. And he said, I want you to tell me if your forearms are tensed or relaxed. And I said, well, they're relaxed. And he said, okay, now I want you to tense your muscles. And so I tensed my muscles and I said, well, that's really interesting because they feel really relaxed now. And that to me was a game changer for my life. I completely changed career goals. I went into this field because what I thought was relaxed was just something that I was used to. I thought everybody felt that way, but I was holding so much tension. And that moment, that aha moment, made me realize, and then we went into learning how to breathe and slowing my heart rate. And I thought, how can it be possible that I can slow my heart rate? I mean, that's insane. but I did, and I could, and I learned how to relax my muscles in my forearms and let go. And then there's the psychology of the letting go and how that led me to years and years of therapy.
Mm.
Yeah, that was a complete and total game changer. I was in a different industry, and I said to my husband, I want to go back to school.
Mm.
I want to do this. And so that's what I did. In 1998, I went back to school as a freshman so that I could learn how to do this, which is
Yeah.
where I am today. Yeah.
What were you doing before you were doing this?
I was in the garment industry.
Okay.
I manufactured buttons. That's what I did.
Like, were you like physically making button by button? Like, what
No,
were you doing in that time? What were you doing?
no. I owned the company. I had an
Wow.
office in Hong Kong, and I traveled the United States and worked with designers and merchandisers and created buttons and manufactured them all over the world and sent them to their factories. And these are big, Calvin Klein,
Wow.
The Gap, Levi's. I worked with really big companies, and that's what I did. Yeah.
So you were already an entrepreneur, already building your business. You already had all those things. It sounds like you probably were quite successful and probably making great money and all those things. So like, what was it about this and that moment that was so profound for you that you were like, I'm going to toss all that away and
Mhm.
go back to school on this weird experimental technology thing?
Because it profoundly changed my life. Everything about I learned all this stuff prior to meeting my husband. Actually, I told you we're both second marriage. So prior to meeting him, and I laugh today and I say, if you met me before I learned biofeedback, you wouldn't have been interested in me at all, because I was a very different person. It really, I learned how to be in my body, to listen to me. Being at that time, I was a single mother. I was traveling all over the country, the world, finding ways to make new, amazing ways to make buttons, and and it was fun. It was good, but I also, it got me sick. So the
Yeah.
biofeedback really changed my life.
Yeah. If you're comfortable sharing, like who were you before you got into biofeedback? You said it made such a drastic difference. Your husband would have never been drawn to you who you are. So like, who was that woman then? And then who did you become?
That woman was someone who was incredibly protective, defensive, definitely an A-type, definitely very stressed out, angry. Yeah, I was an angry person. So I realized how much that was affecting my body, and it felt like my soul and my energy. That experience is what I said, more people need to understand themselves in the way that I've just learned to understand myself. So.
Yeah. Do you remember early on in that journey where you're learning to listen to your body and actually feel your feelings and kind of creating these different new neural associations in a sense of like who you are and what you feel like and what actually feels good, or these different things? Were there like key, I want to say like awakening moments or key moments that you can remember where you're like, when this happened, it just kind of opened up a new doorway for you?
I could probably name 1,000 of them. Yeah, yes. Oh gosh. So again, if you believe in the Buddhist philosophy, I believe in reincarnation. That's my thing. I believe in that, and I believe in kind of a Buddhist thing, and I believe we pick our parents, and I believe that we all have lessons that we need to learn in a lifetime before we can progress to further aspects of soulness, if you will. And I think that anger was the thing that I needed to learn to manage in this lifetime, which is why I chose the parents that I did.
Yeah.
And so that was a big piece for me. And I worked for years on managing anger. So, you mentioned earlier that I've had lots of leadership roles. And we also kind of talked a little bit about how this field should be full of a whole bunch of really, sympathetic, empathetic, lovely people who care for each other. And unfortunately, it's not. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who have their own personal journeys that they weren't blessed with the opportunity to have the experience that I have had earlier in my life. And so I learned in a couple of those experiences where there was a lot of politics going on, and I learned that I had to not be angry, but to forgive. And it took a few years for me to get past some of those things that happened in my career. Took a few years. I kind of still have PTSD even thinking about some of those things that happened to me in my career. But that said, so I feel uncomfortable about naming names, but telling what year, telling what happened, because I have forgiven. So yeah.
Yeah, you and I were talking about that off camera a little bit. Or just, I think it's one of the things that definitely breaks my heart often within this space is I've seen so many people, and I think even to your point, I find that I know often while there might be a lot of disagreement or ego that pushes people away from each other, and there can be that cattiness towards each other. What breaks my heart is that anyone that I've ever talked to in the space is such a big heart and mind for helping other people. And you talk to their patients, you talk to the people who know them, who've been impacted by their lives, and it's just such a profound ripple effect. And I deeply crave for everyone to move more towards each other and work together. Like there's so many, I think the saddest thing in the world would be to have all of these geniuses who are genuinely geniuses in so many different ways, and compassionate, deeply compassionate geniuses, not figure out why they see things differently, and, right? And not work together to solve each other's problems and come up with something better and work towards that like more unified vision that can, I think, help so many more people than we already have.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think it would take to bring people together like that?
Maybe all these people need to do a little of their own personal biofeedback, their neurofeedback.
Spend more practice of what's music.
Yeah, I was interviewed a long time ago where somebody said, "Can you think of anybody who wouldn't benefit from neurofeedback?" And I said, "No. I mean, maybe, possibly the Dalai Lama, but no. Even he would benefit from it, I'm sure."
Yeah.
So no. Yeah.
That kind of makes me pivot to I think a fun question, which is, one of the things that biofeedback can be used for so many different things, whether it's helping somebody with ADHD or, that can be used for somebody recovering from PTSD, or like so many different conditions and, symptomatic kind of things. But then there's like the high performance area, and where a lot of this like kind of intersects in a lot of different ways is with sort of meditation, spirituality, this sort of, to your point, almost going back to the beginning, that place that is beyond words or beyond the label, right? Like even when I talk about, I feel sad isn't really the thing that I'm feeling. That's the label that I put on it. Or even if I'm feeling, I'm feeling tightness in my arm, tightness isn't really what I'm feeling. It's the label that I'm putting on the thing itself. It's kind of like a relevant tangent to this. Like one of the things that I really believe in and talk about a lot is basically the idea that math is wrong, because it's not wrong within a framework of itself, but like you can't actually have two of anything, in my opinion, because it's like you have two fish and one of those eyes on those fish are different. You don't actually have two of the same thing. And so
Exact same thing. Yeah.
yeah. So you can't, and you can, I think you can go all the way down to the atoms and the electrons, and they're all fundamentally different in some way. So like that idea of separation is an illusion. And it's a very valuable illusion. Like it's very useful. There's so many great things we can do with math, but it's also still like a very, very precise guess. And it's still imperfect, even when we kind of get there. And there's this guy, if you've never heard of him, which you might not have because you're not on like YouTube or Instagram maybe as much, but there's this guy named Dr. K. His name's The Healthy Gamer on Instagram or YouTube. And he spent, he was a video game addict and then became, and I promise I'm going to circle this back around. He dropped out of college because of video game addiction, went to India and became a monk for 7 or 10 years, I think. And then came back to the States, went through college, graduated with like 2.4 GPA, and then applied to like 121 med schools and eventually got accepted into Harvard, of all places. And now is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist and does a lot of talking about kind of those intersections of, traditional Western psychiatry and what the monks in that cave are talking about. Right? And one of the things that he talks about in a lot of his episodes is this, or especially when he gets interviewed, is, people will ask him about like, okay, where, trying to go down like a biological reductionism kind of idea where it's like, okay, like everything is just like chemicals and reactions. And he'll often talk about, he's like, yeah, I do believe in like a spiritual plane. And his example he often draws to is like, well, do you have thoughts? Do you have feelings? And like, if so, like, where are they? Can you show me like the data for those things? Right. And to your point, we can talk about like the numbers that I associate with my thoughts or the readings, the colors that maybe are associating with my thoughts from a machine.
Yeah.
Those are the thoughts themselves. Right. And I have thoughts. I have the experience of having thoughts. I can't deny that reality. And so there is something that, for lack of a better word, that does exist beyond words that we can't quite describe or put our words to.
That is just profound to me. My kids always complain about every time I say something to you, you have to say what? And I said, it's not because I'm deaf. It's because I'm just in my thoughts. And so I'm not out there. I'm in here. Mm-hmm. So next time, nudge me and then talk to me and I won't say what. But yeah. I need that separation of in there and out there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm curious. I want to drill down into that, kind of the idea of that study. And I guess the point that I would want to explore with you is, neurofeedback is so profound and all of these different tools and like studies like that have popped up. There's been studies with like remote viewing that have shown evidence, and yet for whatever reason, all of this stuff has a really hard time seeming to almost break that like 4-minute mile marker in a sense, where we kind of really can accept or explore these things and get there. Why do you feel like that is? What is it that keeps us as a society or the scientific community to actually like really embrace or look into this and explore this further?
Well, it's interesting because I have to say, in the early teens, I decided the best way that I can help this field is in education and research, right? So from the education perspective, I've mentored hundreds of people. I've taught people all over the world. And I think that what's happening is that the whole idea of, say, neurofeedback is you hook people up, you push a button, and they get better, and which doesn't happen. I think that people are so used to taking a drug and getting better, so they have to work at it. People have to work at it. And they are convinced that if they play this neurofeedback game, that they're going to get better. But it takes their work too. And it takes the work of the clinician because it is psychophysiology. It's not just physiology. So unless you are skilled to bring those pieces together to nudge out the psychological part with your clients, you're not going to be successful. And so I think that's, and lately there's all these devices now where people can just take them home and, in 2 months they'll report back and, pay more for the rental and they're not really getting any clinical oversight. And so I think that people are forgetting that this is psychophysiology, not just physiology, not just, oh, we'll just play these games and your brain will get better. And then if your brain gets better, well, your mind will get better because, that's what happens. It's not true.
When you say the psycho component is maybe forgotten or missing about, when you're saying that, are you saying that like the like bringing the conscious awareness or effort sort of into that, not just being a passive receiver of whatever's happening?
Yeah. And it's not just the conscious. It's not just the conscious. It's the felt sense. It's the feeling. It's the experience of, it's, a lot of people, it's very saddening to me how watered down these therapies, if you will, we're not supposed to call them therapies, but these trainings have become, because if you're not there, like, automatic thresholding and all these kinds of things, if you're not there and somebody shifts into a different state, if you're not, number one, qualified to see what that different state has occurred in whatever modality you're doing, you're not going to be able to pause and say, what just happened?
Yeah.
And so, your client can say, I just had the most profoundly beautiful experience, or I just was reminded of the sadness when I had to put my dog down, or, whatever. If you're not there to share that exact moment, to get that exact experience to the person, they're not going to learn neurofeedback or biofeedback. That's what they need to learn is, what is your body doing right now while your mind is doing that? Because if you don't put the two pieces together, you're not doing this.
Can you give us an example of what that would look like? Like what kind of a thing would they be maybe making a connection to, or maybe, and what would they maybe be missing that they're not identifying initially?
Okay. So say we'll say neurofeedback. Okay. So you're doing neurofeedback and you're training, you're training alpha up. Okay. So you're doing alpha training up because you're hoping that you've done a brain map and
just to pause you real quick again, just for, I know that you and I can converse on this level. I'm always thinking about the listener who has no idea what like alpha is. So just for context for the listener, like alpha is a brainwave frequency that exists within like it's 10 to 13 hertz or 7 to
14. Oh, 12. It's actually 8 to 12.
Whatever you know more than I do. 8 to 12.
Okay, I'll dumb it down.
Cool.
But can you just ask the question again?
Sure. If I can remember the question. So I'm
not the only one who can't remember the question. That's good, because I'm probably twice your age, so I'm allowed to forget the question.
It's harder for me to remember my own questions though than what somebody else says. The question was basically, you had mentioned specifically that when somebody is doing neurofeedback or applied psychophysiology, right, in particular, right, that there can be this, they're having a reading and they're having a feeling in their body and they're having these thoughts. And part of the goal is for them to become aware of what's happening in their mind while those feelings are happening, right? So, and part of the role of the clinician is to help them identify that beyond just what the technology is necessarily saying. Because again, back to almost my math point, like the technology is making a really good guess, but it's still a guess. And so my question to you was and is, what are some of those things that people are not initially noticing, right, about their feelings and their mind? What are some of the common things that maybe they would discover or realize? And, what are some of the misconceptions they maybe had originally?
So an easy example of that is let's take the notion of systematic desensitization, which is a psychological model where if you are working with someone who has some kind of a phobia, let's say the phobia is leaving the house, agoraphobia. What you do is you work with them. You take a picture of an outside place, a park or something like that, and you expose them to it. And so then they're exposed to this, and you're watching their physiology shift because now they are becoming anxious because this is the a signal of going outside, right? Then you work with them to breathe and to relax, and you get them to the point where they are not frightened or becoming anxious or vigilant from the experience of looking at this picture. The next thing you do is work with them to walk outside their front door. If you have the luxury of being with them at their home or outside of your office or something like that, and you work with them to reduce their physiological vigilance while they are experiencing walking out the door. And then you take it to the next step. So that's basically systematic desensitization. Without the added feature, if you will, of seeing what's going on in your body, it's a very effective, lots of research shows that systematic desensitization is very effective, but it's a lot more effective when one recognizes sooner than later what's going on in their body. So you can have the conversation of, okay, now we're going to go outside. And the physiology is just going to go off the charts. Their skin conductance, which is the modality that measures sweat, will go up, their temperature will go down because their muscles will tense up, their heart rate will speed, and so on. And so what we're doing is we're saying, look at how your physiology is responding by the mere suggestion of going outside. So we can teach them to regulate at that point, rather than the point of they've gone outside and now they're in a complete panic attack. So that's the beauty of being hooked up and being amplified, is that you can show, look at what your body is doing just by my suggesting you do whatever that thing is, putting a spider on your lap, whatever.
Yeah. So if I understand this correctly, so what you're saying is that, like, okay, somebody has this agoraphobic fear of going outside, so you slowly build them up. But with the technology, to your point, like, you can see, or you have a mirror, right? Because in a lot of ways, I think of neurofeedback or biofeedback technology as a really fancy mirror, right? It lets you know what's going on. And if I talk to this agoraphobic person, hey, like, what do you think about going outside? And they have the device connected to them, then they can see immediately that their, like, fight or flight system is going active, or their heart rate or variability is, shooting through the roof, or whatever it might be.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And so they're able to start building awareness earlier rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's at that point that it is much easier to abort the panic attack than it is when you're in the panic attack. So if you teach them the skill to recognize when their body is going there rather than once it's been there, it's a game changer. It's an absolute game changer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it makes me think about, I was in this acting class years ago, and it was almost like this philosophical acting class from this one teacher who taught, like, mindset stuff. And I remember him talking about, like, noticing your thought when he would ask a question. And it would, like, at first it'd be like, oh, what did I have for dinner? And then it would, like, I would have the thought, or, like, I would notice it, and then I would, like, raise my hand. And then I kept noticing, I was like, oh wait, I can notice actually to the point where I don't even have, like, the what come out fully, right? You start to being able to really, really hone in on, like, oh, I'm able to be that level of self-aware. And it sounds very similar to that, but with these emotions that maybe are, I don't even know what you'd call them, because it's not necessarily like a bad emotion, right, per se, but it's maybe an emotion that's not serving them or isn't congruent. I'm almost curious about that. How do you phrase that type of fear that person obviously would maybe like to go outside, but it's so terrifying, but it's obviously not maybe congruent with what reality is currently, and maybe was at one point in their life. Like, what do you
Yeah.
call that type of emotion or feeling or whatever?
Well, all of that
Yeah.
is not necessarily what biofeedback primarily does. Biofeedback primarily does amplify the behaviors in your body. So if you are also their talk therapist, you would talk through what you just articulated. But as the biofeedback practitioner, you would want to articulate what it is that they're feeling. So you bring all that together, sometimes with other therapists, and sometimes, depending upon, how comprehensive your relationship is with your client, patient, whatever. So it's more about recognizing the feeling rather than articulating what the feeling is. It's just simply, I've got that feeling in my gut. Ooh, I feel like maybe there might be an anxiety situation coming on. You don't even really have to articulate it. I've got that feeling. I know that feeling in my gut. And so I'm just going to go take a few breaths. If I'm at work, I'm going to go in the bathroom. I'm going to do some deep breathing, whatever. And you just, step yourself away so that you can take care of yourself.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It's like you're bringing that awareness to that state at its birth before it's like fully evolved into that thing, and then you can make a new choice earlier, and the earlier making that choice, the better change in behavior or outcome that you have. Exist.
Yeah, exactly. That's because we're amplifying. If I have sensors on my finger measuring, skin conductance, again, which is measuring the clamminess of your hands, right? When you get really nervous, your hands get really clammy, right? So it's measuring the clamminess of my hands, and it's telling me, hello, your hands are getting clammy. And it's like, you don't even actually feel it until you learn how to feel it. And then you learn how to feel it. You don't need the sensors anymore, because you're like, uh-oh, here it comes. I need to take care of myself.
Yeah. And what a gift to be able to realize that you can, like, I don't want to say have control, because I don't even necessarily like that idea, but you can start to change maybe some of these behaviors that you feel not in control of, right? If your body is just having this reaction and you are sort of at the whim and mercy of that reaction, it's a very powerless and kind of terrifying feeling in a lot of ways, right? Well, if you can start to learn to consciously like regulate that, and use that body level nervous system. I want to share a story from my own experience with.
But hold up, can I let me just interject, because I just want to say that I appreciate that you don't want to use the word control, because I've always said, take the word control and out the front door. It's self-regulation. We can't, control is all about out there, which we cannot do, but we can self-regulate how we respond to the stuff out there that we can't control. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that was kind of where I want to get to, was like, honestly, my first like kind of realization with biofeedback, and my first like, conscious regulation in a sense, like where I noticed that was, I'd meditated for years in my life. And I remember like the first time I saw my thoughts and was like very aware of sort of like choosing to be caught in a vicious circle instead of choosing something else. And then one of the other big realizations was when I was using, I think it was the HeartMath inner balance device for probably, I was probably using it for close to a month, I think, at that point. And I was working as a server in a fine dining restaurant. And I don't remember anything about what happened. But there was something, and I remember like, there was like basically 3 or 4 things that were happening all at once that meant I was in a really big pickle. It's like one of those things where you need to get somebody's drink because it's already late, and somebody's food didn't quite arrive on time, and they're all at different tables and different ends of whatever's going on. Right. And so I remember having that and feeling, to your point, that fight or flight come up. And to your point, because you kind of corrected me earlier with like the conscious word, it wasn't even so much that I was thinking this, but I was able to just like shift my emotional or like my state
Your
into
response.
yeah, my response into like this more parasympathetic state where I felt, calm despite the freaking outness of what was going on. I was able to make clear decisions and like resolve the issue. Where before I would have had my, nervous system just kind of hijack me and be running
Mm-hmm.
around and spend more time freaking out than actually like solving the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Actually just saw this like YouTube thumbnail recently that was something like skipping the freak out is your biggest superpower. So like if you can figure out how to like not just have that freak out moment, but just go into like relax, like figure out how to
Breathe.
actually solve the problem, breathe.
Breathe.
Yeah.
Breathing is amazing. When I was in practice, and I teach this to my students now, when someone is feeling like they're going into that state and they're starting to learn those kind of precursor feelings that they wouldn't have felt until they have gone into a panic attack, is
Mhm.
you feel it coming on and you ask yourself, where am I? What am I doing? And how do I feel? And if if the answer to those three questions is incongruent, you need to step aside. You need to go and settle yourself down.
Yeah. Yeah. If I feel like I need to fight somebody, rip somebody's head off, and I'm actually just sitting alone in my apartment and nothing's actually coming to kill me, why am I having that reaction?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Um, Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I want to ask you about and go deeper into. I'm curious. I know this is like untraditional for a podcast episode, but like, is there a direction that you want to go to at this juncture with Lobe anymore?
I told you I'm a blank slate. I don't have a direction.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Okay. No worries. I guess where I would want to go is, I would love to actually explore your education. So like you have, I believe, 2 PhDs and several different degrees and it seems like 5 or 6 different certifications and so many different things. You've been a nonstop learner and go-getter. Um, One of the early things that I think you studied was humanistic psychology. Can you talk about what humanistic psychology is and how is that influential in your journey?
So humanistic psychology is you can do cognitive behavioral therapy. You can do all different kinds of therapies, all different kinds of talk therapy. Humanistic psychology is a broader. It ties the pieces together of mind body. It brings in the body. It brings in the person, the whole person, the self. In a way that other psychologies don't. So that's, if I had to, I'd want to go Google right now.
Sure.
What the heck is humanistic psychology? But what I can say is that it's a form of psychology that is humanistic, that allows the faults and nuances of the person, and doesn't come into the conversation with, okay, you're screwed up and I'm your therapist and I'm going to fix you. It doesn't. That's not what it does. What it does is it says, tell me about you, human. Tell me who you are, and let's talk about what your goals are, how you want to shift things. Where your place is in the universe, that kind of thing. So it's really more about the whole person rather than just the frontal lobe, as I said earlier.
Yeah, so it's a lot of what I heard in that is like integrating, like you said, the body into psychology, which like
Yeah.
a lot of the way that I'm kind of hearing that is like if you're looking at the early psychologists and probably a lot of other psychologists, right? You're looking at like Freud and it's almost these more like highly, for lack of a better word, like story driven ideas, right? It's like this constant narrative of what things mean versus like, okay, well, how do we integrate this with like that like beyond words component, that feeling, the physicalness of what's going on, the actual goodness of our experience.
Right. And Carl Jung would probably, even though he was a student of Freud's. He would probably be one of the first that might be unofficially considered humanistic, because he actually used the skin conductance that I mentioned a little bit ago, the measuring of the clamminess of the hands while he was doing his word association tests. Yeah. So
can you share any more about that? Like, what was, if you wanted maybe to share, like, what does the skin conductance teach us? You mentioned the clamminess of the hands. If you know anything about maybe the history or like how that connects with Carl Jung, I'd be fascinated to hear.
Yeah. There was a whole period of time where lots of physiologists were looking at the electrical components. The heart gives off electricity. The brain gives off electricity. The skin conductance is an electrical component. Muscle tension is an electrical component. And so what they did was there's two sensors for a skin conductance, and they put an electrical current that kind of runs through them. And needless to say, sweat is a great conductant, right? I mean, it's salt water. It's a great conductant. Yeah. So the more sweaty your hands are, which comes off of a different kind of gland than the gland that is thermoregulating, like when you sweat because it's hot, it's a different kind of gland that, and it responds specifically to stress or anxiety. And there's a side note that I'll come back to, but anyway, that little tiny electrical current, I mean, it's in what's known as microsiemens, which is such a tiny, tiny measure that, again, is amplified so that you can recognize when the tiniest bit of skin or sweat is coming onto your skin that you wouldn't recognize otherwise. But now you've got this amplified system that is saying, oh, your skin conductance just went up 2 microsiemens. So over time you learn, like, oh my gosh, my skin conductance has gone up 2 microsiemens, and you don't even need the amplifier to tell you that, and so that's what I was talking about earlier about aborting a panic attack. The interesting thing about skin conductance, did I answer the question before I move on to my other little side note? Did I actually?
Yeah. You explained that skin conductance. I would love to get to the Carl Jung connection with it, but go ahead.
So the Carl Jung connection with it, it was maybe about a 20-year-old, maybe even a 10-year-old, 20-year-old modality that someone said, oh my gosh, look at this. We have sweat glands in our fingers, in our toes, in our forehead that can give us information about our vigilance, not about whether we're hot or cold. Isn't this interesting? So he decided, when he was doing his word association, he'd say the word mother and the person would respond, and say the word, frog, and the person would respond differently, obviously, hopefully. But he was also measuring their skin conductance reaction to those words, not just their physiological, word response, but also their physiological response. And so that helped him to navigate what to do next with these patients. And of course, he did a research study on it, but also how to navigate utilizing this whole word association thing. So that's really interesting. But more current, there is a researcher at Stanford named Robert Sapolsky, who wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And we have no idea why we have this. It's the eccrine gland. We have no ECCRINE, eccrine gland. We have no idea why we have this system. It serves no function, no physiological function. It doesn't cool the body. It doesn't tell us we're hungry. It has no other physiological function in our current times. And so he postulated that this system was created to abort an event that could be detrimental to our lives. That would be a survival mechanism. back in that day, many thousands of years ago, we didn't wear shoes. If we were being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, we would grab a weapon, we would run, we would grab vines, we would do whatever we could to get away from whatever it was that was threatening us. It could be an enemy, it could be an earthquake, it could be a saber-toothed tiger. We would run. And the clamminess in our hands would be gripping. It would, and in our feet, because again, we didn't wear, Nikes. So, we would be utilizing that clamminess as a tool to run faster, to grab things, to be able to grab tools, to be able to climb up things and that kind of thing. So essentially, it's completely useless to just about anyone who doesn't do biofeedback. But if you do biofeedback, it's a great tool because it is an absolutely within the millisecond measure of your response to what's happening at the moment. It's a beautiful modality for biofeedback.
Why are you drawn to, I would say, like that label of applied psychophysiology versus biofeedback or neurofeedback?
Because applied psychophysiology doesn't have to be biofeedback or neurofeedback. It could be walking in the park. It could be getting on a scale and weighing yourself. You weigh yourself every morning and that's biofeedback. So, we have to be careful about, there's biofeedback therapy, training, that kind of thing. But we are applied psychophysiologists. That's what we are. But we do biofeedback or neurofeedback. Got
it. Beautiful. I'm curious, and you just mentioned getting on a scale is a form of biofeedback. And one of the things I've thought about often, I'm a gamer. I love video games, and I'm really curious because often the example that I would give to potential clients when I worked as a director of sales for a neurofeedback company was they'd be like, well, how does it make sense that I can hear this sound and my brain learns that this is like the right direction to go? And the way that I would describe it was I would give the example of like Mario, right? And so when you play Mario and you've never had the instructions before, you move forward and you run into a Goomba and you die and you're like, oh, I guess that's bad, right? And then you go forward and you drop a coin and without being taught anything from words or an instruction manual, you have an intuitive sense that that was a good thing to do. And so you keep doing it. And so I often almost think of video games as a form of biofeedback as well, where it's like teaching you and your brain to think about things. I talk with a lot of other friends, and depending on the kinds of games they play, I notice how they think or interact differently with the world. People who play a lot of, I would say, Nintendo or Zelda kind of inspired games, but it encourages a lot of curiosity, a lot of, you can just go to the end of the level, but there's also the secret over here, and there's also this thing over here. And what if you went this way? What if you tried this, right? And so it kind of encourages that type of play, in a sense, in the way that you interact with the world. I'm curious, what do you think about that? And what other kinds of maybe biofeedback should we be aware of in our life that might be serving us or not serving us?
Okay, well, so to answer the question about gaming and the difference between gaming and neurofeedback is that gaming stimulates parts of the brain that are not as healthy for you as training the brain to do whatever it is that we assess should be done, right? So your brain is being trained, like you said. My gamer friends, they have different social skills. So you're training your brain to just to check out, basically. I mean, we there are studies, and we have looked at the effects of addictive gaming, if you will, on how the brain, and it's an addiction, and on how the brain responds to it. So it's not a positive thing. It's not like neurofeedback. That's one of the things that frustrates me with neurofeedback these days, is that people, they put a movie on, and the movie, fades in and out, and the sound goes in and out, and da-da-da. And it's like, no, can you just give a bar graph or something like that? Make it really discreet. Let people know this is good, this is not good. Not,
Mm.
I guess it's good, or oh, it's so frustrating because I wanted to hear the rest of that sentence,
Yeah.
or whatever. And then there's all this emotional stuff that comes up, and
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. How do you toe the line between that and, I guess, making it interesting enough or engaging enough for somebody to want to do or stick with, right? Like I think about, I just used a great app to help me lose a bunch of weight. And, one of the things that they talk about from Dr. Mike Israetel with that is like one of the biggest, most important factors with any diet is adherence. Like ultimately, if it's not a diet that you're going to stick with, then it doesn't matter if it's like biologically optimal or not, right? Like there has to be that line of, ultimately one that you stick with and follow through with at the end of the day is the most valuable piece. So I'm curious for that with regards to neurofeedback or biofeedback, how do you integrate that component of it?
Well, the first thing I have to say is all these crazy diets. Bottom line, watch your calories.
Right.
Just
Yeah,
watch your calories.
exactly. Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you eat, as long as you eat healthy. I guess it does matter what you eat. Eat healthy.
Right.
Watch your calories.
That's what we're,
But no, in terms of you learn. So I once had a kid that came in when I was practicing and came in and he agreed with his mother 100%. Yeah, these are problems in school. He was a really gorgeous person, and very bright and whatever. And he said, but I don't know. I don't know if I want to do it. And the mom was really great. She was like, I don't want you to do this unless, you buy in. And I'm not, neither of us was there to force him to buy in. It was really a lovely experience. Yeah, I really appreciated the mothers, the way that they handled it.
hmm.
So finally, he said, "Well, I'm still thinking about it." I think he was probably 9, maybe 10 years old. I mean, it was really sweet. And finally, he said, most of my friends, I mean, they think I'm really funny. And I'm just afraid that I'm not going to be funny anymore if I do this.
Hmm.
And so it's like that's eh, that was great because I knew I knew what to say to him. Like we're not going to change your funniness. You're always going to be
Mhm.
who you are. We're going to teach you how to put your brain into the state that it needs to be into for what it is that you're doing at the moment. If it's homework,
Mm.
if it's making your bed, if it's being funny, if it's, sitting still in class,
Yeah.
whatever it is. This kid's going to go off and be some famous comedian. If he isn't already, because that was
Sure.
probably 15 years ago that
Yeah.
we had this conversation. I should look it up and see, well, is this the same?
Yeah. What's he at? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because that's such a common thing that, I remember Whitney Cummings was on the Tim Ferriss podcast years ago, and she was talking about, she's a comedian, and she was talking about how when she was going through echoing therapy and a bunch of other therapies at the time that were really profound, that was like her deepest fear with like, well, if I become happy, right, if I like become happy and enjoy my life, will I lose this amazing thing that I have, that I love, that is a part of who I am? And I've
Mhm.
seen that with so many people with whatever it is that makes them, in their mind at least, very special, right? Whether that's their intelligence or their career that they've built or their
Yeah.
drive or
Yeah.
their whatever, right? There's always that thing that we're like, well, but the reason that I'm so good at this is because of this self-loathing or this pain or whatever it
Right.
is. So like,
Right.
so how do you help people transition to something like that? Because that is a very scary thing.
It
Like,
is.
you're on
It
that other
is.
side.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get that because as I said, my journey in this life is anger. And for the longest time, I held on to my anger because I felt like if I let it go, that I would drop my guard and that people would abuse me.
Hmm.
Right. So, yeah, and so I get that. And so then uh, how to teach people to allow themselves to get better. I think there's way too many layers to that, and it's all extremely humanistic and personalized. So, that's a really hard question to answer, because I think that it would be, it just wouldn't give justice to how every single person needs to manage that journey.
That's totally valid. If you're open to it, as somebody who gave up their button building business, are you open to like walking us through maybe your own journey with that and how you dealt with your own experience of it?
Of giving up my button business or giving up my anger?
Well, I guess in a sense like both. I mean, did you have fears of like, would I be successful anymore? Would I be, have that same drive or whatever it was that you had? Like, were you afraid of losing those things? And like, if so, like, what was it that got you to the other side of that?
Yeah. Well, how I got into biofeedback in the first place was that I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. So I have Graves' disease, which is an autoimmune dysfunction, and completely destroys your thyroid, which is a very obviously important gland. And so I went through about a year and a half of managing that. And that's when somebody said to me, you really should try biofeedback. And so, and again, that all changed my life. So it was really more of a medical, kind of need to figure out how to regulate myself, how to take care of myself in a way when I've got this disease, right? So, I don't know, I can think of a lot of different stages in my life where that question could be meaningful.
What's the first one that comes to your mind?
It's hard. It's hard because I don't know. I kind of said it earlier that there were times in my professional career that changed me dramatically, and that were extremely painful, but aren't painful anymore. So they were good. They were good learning lessons for me. They were good stepping stones for me. I don't know.
That's a different question. I guess jumping on the bandwagon of technology and how it's advancing and some of the points that you're talking about, one of the things I heard you talking about in another episode or a training was, the importance of developing that real, for lack of a better word, like raw skill with like EEG or some of these kind of really fundamental things. And the more kind of technology that we introduce, the more, the easier it is to kind of be separated from that, the baseline technology, right? And something that I've been thinking about too with AI or technology and all these different things, and I think about it even as a millennial who it feels like we're often the only generation that knows how to work a computer because my mom has no idea how to do anything, and my my niece and nephew, it's just all apps. Everything just works. There's not like they don't have to troubleshoot something or go in and fix a file or a connector or this thing or move a hard drive around or any of that stuff. And it makes me really think like, well, maybe that's how like magic even developed at some point, is that people were just like so technologically advanced, but so removed from what makes the thing actually work. I'm curious, what do you see the influence of AI playing in neurofeedback? Do you see it as being positive, negative, or do you think that there's a way to merge that in a positive way if it's going in a dangerous direction? What are your thoughts on
that? So I'm working on a project right now where it's a grant for research funding, private, and their reviewers came back with a whole bunch of questions, and so I went back to my team. I'm a co-PI. I went back to my team and I said, we need to answer these questions. Person A, do you mind doing that? That's your expertise. Person B, will you do this? And two of them just copy and pasted AI, ChatGPT. And I said, so then I took that and spent an hour and a half, 2 hours, putting it into our words and actually answering the question, that the reviewers had posed. Because, you can click a button and all kinds of stuff comes out of, AI. And so then I said to them, from now on, no more cut and paste from AI. I need for you guys to think about this. And it was a whole argument. That's the future. I don't have time. It took me long enough just to do that. And I'm like, well, if that's where you want your brain to go, where you don't have to think anymore. I mean, let's relate that to GPS, right? When's the last time you really cared about, where to make the left and where to make the right?
Yeah.
Right. That part of our brain is, it's becoming obsolete. That part of our brain. We don't need that part of our brain anymore. Those taxi drivers in London where that famous study was done, their hippocampi and parietal lobes are probably mush because they don't need to use them anymore.
Sure.
So it's the same thing. It's like we need to persevere. We need to go beyond it. We need to utilize it. I think it's an excellent skill, but we need to use it to help us think, not to think for us. So that's where I feel about that.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, that's, I have a coach, and his wisdom to me about 2 weeks ago was, he was like, use ChatGPT as much as you can for like 3 to 4 hours a day, or 3 to 4 hours a week.
A day.
3 hours, 3 to 4 hours a day, but 3 to 4 hours a week minimum. And so I started doing that and just trying to see like what everything I could use it for. And it's been fascinating because, to your point, if I don't know what I want, it can't give me that, which is a thing, right? So it's that. But there are all these little things where if I try to just have it do a job for me, I find it's not super great at that. But if I use it to help me think more clearly, if I use it to ask me questions, or if I use it to process things and start to identify more about what I want, almost use it as that like in real time biofeedback device in a sense, but almost for my mind in a lot of ways. Although it can, if you use that as a therapist, it can very much ground you into your body if you ask it to. So there's like all these really cool ways that you can, to your point, use it. But I think it is very much like any tool, right? You can use fire to burn down a forest, or you can use it to cook a salmon, whatever you want to do.
True that.
Speaking of food, I do want to ask you about this. So you have all of these wonderful, titles and accolades and places that you do in the neurofeedback space and all this. And then you are also if I understand this correctly, like the president of a home winemaking.
The chair.
The chair.
Okay.
Can you explain like what that is? Like,
Yeah.
How did you get involved with that, et cetera?
Okay. So I live in Napa, California. And in 2017 and 2020, we had horrific fires, right? So in 2017, we moved here. My husband and I moved here in 2016. And we bought a property, 2.5 acres, that had the potential for a vineyard. We were really excited about it. We bought the house, we bought the property, and we completely gutted and, added square footage and just built our dream house. We have a cabin on our property. We were living in the cabin for 6 months, and we moved finally into the main house. We were so excited. 4 days into moving into the main house, we were evacuated because the 2017 fire was 2 miles away and heading our way. So we got evacuated. We hadn't even finished the floors. But we got evacuated. One of the fire chiefs at the time was on our property and said, we have a creek on our property, the Dry Creek, and said, if this fire goes any further than where it is right now, it's going to take out a VA center, which is about a mile as the crow flies east of us. We have a big mountain in between us, into a town called Yountville. And that was when we got air support, and they put the fire out. And so I said, how can I give back? You saved my property. You saved my house. It means so much to me. So I became on the board of this Fire Safe Council. That's what they're called. I live on Mount Veeder, so it's a Mount Veeder Fire Safe Council. And within like 2 or 3 months, I became the chair of their annual fundraiser, which is the Home Winemakers Classic. And what it is it's the only event of its kind here in Napa. You can go to tons of tastings and tons of events with commercial winemakers. This one is for people who are home winemakers. And in fact, this year we're including beer. So we have home brewers as well. So, and it's a really, really, really fun event. So we have a big silent auction, we have sponsorships, we have all this stuff. So anyway, that's what you're hearing about. But the cool thing is also that since then, the field that the firefighters were tenting in, living in, camping in while they were trying to put out this devastating fire, is now our vineyard. So we now have a vineyard that is going into its 5th year, and we're on our 3rd vintage of making wine. So, yeah.
Wow. And so a home winemaker is just somebody who makes wine out of their home. Does that mean can it be like a giant, large, huge vineyard? Or like, yeah.
As long as they're not bonded and commercial, they are allowed to come and pour their wines. And it is a donation, really, because they might pour a case or 2 of their wine. So it's their donation to the Fire Safe Council. And people come, we get like 200 attendees, and they come and they taste the wines, and, it's great fun. It's I'm very proud to be a part of that.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about giving back soon, and since my why question is already answered, but like, what is it that, drives you to always being a leader in seemingly everything that you do? I guess there's maybe you take yoga and you're not a leader at your yoga studio or whatever else you do. It seems like almost anything that you have some level of passion or love for, you're like right to the front and taking control and leadership in that space. Like, what is it that drives you to do that?
Well, some people might say it's because I'm a complete control freak. But, I like to think of it differently. I feel, I had a therapist who once told me that I was hyper competent. That I need to fuck up a few times. It'd be good for you to just screw things up a few times. So, no, I'm just a very efficient and competent person. I am.
Yeah.
I own it. I'm good with it. I used to be really afraid of that and not want to share that because it sounds so narcissistic, but I'm a very competent person.
Yeah. Cool. I love that you just can own it like that. What for somebody who's wanting to grow in leadership, what in your mind makes a great leader?
I think that what makes it, that's such a good question. What makes a great leader is someone who is willing to connect with their intuition and feel, I don't want to say confident, but just feel willing to see their vision come to fruition. And not in a way that it's like, oh, it's my way or the highway or anything like that, but just, I have this vision. Like I said earlier, I felt, the way that I can help this field will be in education and in research. So I have this vision and I've accomplished that. I'm an associate professor at Saybrook University. I'm NIH funded. I'm involved in lots of different certainly dissertations because it's a doctoral level program and so on. And I just feel like that was my vision, and I trusted myself that I could do that. So I just feel like, don't trust yourself in something that you don't feel intuitively that you can achieve. Do what you intuitively feel that you can achieve.
Yeah. This might be a question it's harder to answer than we can in the next 5 or so minutes, but
are we there? Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I can always go longer, but I want to respect your time. How does somebody reconnect with their intuition, or how do they connect with the intuition at all?
That was something that I went through. There's a great book by Carolyn Myss, M-Y-S-S. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. She's got a few books out that talk about connecting with your intuition and honoring it, recognizing it, trusting it, respecting it. And when I first took over the very first practice that I had with biofeedback, I bought my mentor out, actually, is what happened. But and it was all good. It's all good. And there I was with this. Now I had this clinic that I was like, oh wow, and I learned how to trust my intuition so that I could be a really good practitioner in biofeedback and neurofeedback. And that's, her books really guided me in that way. I don't know.
Title that you have in mind?
Hmm?
Is there a specific title for the book?
What is it called? Sacred Contract. Sacred Contract. Yeah. Cool. It's just really honoring your power.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so many of us are afraid of our power, and it's not our control. Like I said, control is out there and we can't do anything about that. It's honoring our power and loving our strength. Or at least maybe that's personal for me because I'm a very powerful, strong person. Maybe that's just really more about me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, not to get too psychological, but in some ways it's always about me, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And it resonates a lot with where I'm going on in my life, and I'm sure a lot of people are who are listening to this episode. Cynthia, this has been absolutely fantastic. One question I always ask my guests at the end of the episode is just, what's a question that you would have for the audience to maybe something that could shift their perspective or have them think about something in a different way?
Well, I think I might say, whatever it is that you're afraid of, take it on. Ask yourself, what are you afraid of? And take it on, and do, and allow that to do the best for you and for the people around you. So I guess that wasn't really a question, that was a suggestion, but I guess I would say, and maybe I would just say, think about what it, I don't know. I don't know how to put that into a question. So let me have
well, you said, what are you afraid of? Which I think is a great question, right? I think it's a great question to ask, and to even be thinking about that. Because I think a lot of times we don't, or at least I'll speak for I don't actively ask that question. I think about what I want, or I think about what I'm driven toward, or that kind of thing. But I don't often directly ask and explore what I'm afraid of. Maybe I'm afraid of asking that.
There you have it.
Yeah. Again, Cynthia, this has been wonderful. Anywhere you want to point people to, or anything you want to plug at the end of the episode?
If you want to learn about neurofeedback or biofeedback, my company is APED, Applied Psychophysiology Education, aped.training. If you're interested in getting a PhD in applied psychophysiology, Saybrook University, That's where I teach. I would love to see you there. Um, if you're a home winemaker, come on, join us at the Home Winemakers Classic or Beer Maker. Yeah, that's it.
I love it. Thank you, Cynthia. This has been absolutely fantastic, and we'll talk again soon.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Absolutely.